The final words her father ever spoke to her in private were not shouted in anger, but delivered with the chilling precision of a surgeon's scalpel. "You have been a constant and public disappointment, Arabella," he said, inspecting his writing. Gloves as if she were a mere smudge on the landscape. "An unmarketable asset. Today, I am finally settling that account." She did not yet grasp the full monstrous meaning of his words, but the cold finality in his eyes told her that the life she knew was over. The silent, imposing man waiting in the courtyard below was not a suitor. He was a consequence. The heat that settled over Fort Benson was a relentless oppressor. It pressed down from a cloudless, white-hot sky, making the very air a thing to be felt with every breath. In the center of the dusty fort courtyard, Lady Arabella Covington stood. With her head bowed, the weight of her humiliation even heavier than the July sun. Her expensive gown, a prison of whalebone and silk satin brought all the way from London, felt like a cruel joke in this unforgiving landscape. Each stay of her corset was an accusing finger, digging into her flesh, a constant reminder of why she was here. "This is the consequence of your choices, Arabella." Her father's voice cut through the air, sharp as chipped glass and utterly devoid of any paternal warmth. A few soldiers and traders seeking shade had paused, their curious stares worse than contempt. "Your lack of discipline and your disobedience have become a stain our family can no longer abide." Arabella's cheeks burned. At 23, her father's ambitions for a strategic marriage had been thwarted by what he called her indulgent nature and unbecoming physique. Now, his patience was at an end. "Chief Maka," he announced, turning to the Apache leader, who stood with the stillness of the distant mountains themselves. "As per our agreement regarding the land borders, my daughter is now your charge. Her service to your people will seal our pact. Father, please." Arabella whispered, her voice lost in horror. "Silence," her father hissed, his eyes cold as steel. The Apache chief's eyes, dark as obsidian, rested on her. They held none of the scorn she saw in every other man's face, nor the pity she saw in the women's. They simply were deepened. Unreadable, he offered a single deliberate nod of acceptance. "She is yours," Lord Covington said, already turning away. "Do with her as you see fit." He mounted his stallion, turning the horse without a final glance in her direction, effectively erasing her from his world. As his form disappeared through the fort's gates, Arabella felt the foundations of her life crumble. Abandoned in a strange land, handed over to a man her people considered a savage, all because she could not be the daughter her father wanted. The Apache warrior approached her, his movements measured and calm. She flinched as he drew near, but he did not reach for her. Instead, he reached for the small satchel that held the last vestiges of her former life. With a slight tilt of his head, he indicated the vast shimmering expanse beyond the forts. Walls dot as they walked, Arabella did not look back. With every step away from the fort, she felt the life she had always known crumble to dust behind her, leaving only the woman she was now, abandoned, disgraced, and utterly, terrifyingly, alone. The days that followed blurred into a single agonizing pilgrimage. Arabella's impractical shoes, designed for polished floors and garden paths, were shredded by the unforgiving terrain. Every step was a negotiation with pain. The sun was a relentless eye in the sky, scorching the skin she tried in vain to shield with her thin shawl. Thirst became a permanent fire in her throat, and she had braced herself for the cruelty of a captor, the impatience of a man slowed by an unwanted burden. Yet the cruelty never came. The Apache leader remained an enigma, a steady and silent figure against the searing landscape. When her breath came in ragged gasps and her legs trembled, he would simply halt. He offered no word, no gesture of impatience. His silence was an unspoken permission to recover. In the evenings, by a small fire, he would share his portion of food, dried meat, and a few wild berries, and his precious water. The offering was made without ceremony, a simple fact of survival, not a transaction of kindness. His silence was not menacing. It was as vast and neutral as the sky above them. On the third day, her voice, a dry rasp, broke the stillness. "To what place do you lead me?" Maka did not turn, but gestured with his chin toward a distant, hazy line of mountains. "Home," he said. It was the first word he had spoken to her, and its simplicity struck her more than a whole speech could have. That night, as a chill descended that seemed to seep into her very bones, he wordlessly laid a second heavy hide blanket over her trembling form. The gesture, so devoid of sentiment, yet so profound in its consideration, threw her entire understanding of him into chaos. It was so contrary to her expectations, it left her speechless. "Why?" she finally managed to ask one evening, as they sat across the flickering flames. "I am of no use to you. Why take on such a liability?" He regarded her for a long moment, the firelight dancing in his deep eyes. "Your people measure a person by what they have," he stated, his voice low and even. "They have forgotten how to see what a person is." Arabella fell silent, pondering his words as she watched him sharpen his knife with an unwavering focus. She began to notice the quiet competence in everything he did, the way he found water where she saw only rock, the way his eyes read the barren earth like a map dot, and as she watched him, she realized a subtle shift had occurred within her. The terror that had been her constant companion was beginning to recede, making way for something she hadn't felt in a very long time, a tentative, unwilling curiosity. The village did not announce itself. Instead, the landscape seemed to part, revealing a hidden valley cradled within the protective arms of towering sandstone cliffs. The air here was cooler, smelling of damp earth and cedar as Maka led her into the settlement. The life around them paused for a moment. Children stopped their games, their wide, dark eyes following her. Women looked up from their work, their gazes falling upon her curious, certainly, but devoid of the malice she had braced herself to face. Still, Arabella felt like a clumsy ornate doll, painfully out of place. She instinctively pulled her tattered shawl tighter around her shoulders, a useless gesture to hide her frame and her foreign. He stopped before a wickiup, a structure of branches and hides that seemed to have grown from the earth itself. From within, an old woman emerged. Her face was a landscape carved by time, with the deep lines of seasons past, but her eyes, though clouded with age, were as sharp as shards of flint. A rapid exchange in their fluid language passed between grandson and grandmother. Then, with a nod to Arabella, Maka turned and was gone, leaving her in the old woman's care. The old woman, Nalani, beckoned her inside. The interior was a sanctuary. From the relentless sun, cool and dim, it smelled of dry earth, wood smoke, and something herbal. Tools and containers were arranged with a neat purpose along the curved walls. Nalani pointed to a sleeping roll of furs in one corner, then to a clay pot of water. The message was clear, conveyed without a single shared word. "Rest. You are safe here." From the shelter of the doorway, Arabella watched the life of the village. She had been taught to expect chaos, the law of the strong. Instead, she witnessed a quiet symphony of purpose. Women worked together, the rhythm of pestle and mortar, a steady beat. Men returned from the hunt, their bounty shared equally. There was no competition, no pageantry. It was a community bound not by law, but by an unspoken understanding of mutual reliance. The next morning, Nalani handed her a large clay pot and gestured toward a glistening ribbon of water at the valley's edge. A simple task. A chance to prove she was not entirely useless. But when she filled the vessel, it became a formidable weight. Her soft hands, never accustomed to labor, began to tremble. Halfway back, her grip, compromised by fatigue, finally failed her. The pot slipped. 4 A heart-stopping moment, it seemed to hang in the air, then it plummeted to the rocky ground. It shattered with a sound of absolute finality. Arabella stood frozen, staring at the wet earth and the fragments of her failure. Even the simplest task was beyond her. She sank to her knees among the sharp-edged shards of her own incompetence. And the hot, bitter tears she had held back for days finally spilled, tracing clean paths through the dust on her cheeks. A shadow fell over her kneeling form. Arabella looked up through a blur of tears to see Maka standing there. She braced for the scorn she felt she deserved, a rebuke for her clumsiness. Instead, he knelt beside her, his movements unhurried and deliberate. He gently took her hand, where a sharp piece of pottery had left a crimson line. From a pouch at his hip, he produced a single leaf, crushed it between his fingers, and pressed it to the wound. The stinging pain eased almost instantly. "Leave," he said, nodding toward the broken pottery. He unfastened a smaller leather waterskin from his own belt and handed it to her. One does not learn to carry the river in a single journey. You begin with what your hands can hold. The simple wisdom in his words, offered without a trace of pity, touched her deeply. That single act of understanding was the beginning. He started, bringing her plants, using gestures and simple words to teach her which healed, which could be eaten, and which were poison. His patience was a quiet, constant presence. He never showed a flicker of impatience when she confused one leaf for another. Why? She asked him one afternoon, as they sat in the shade of a cliff face. Why this patience with me? He considered her for a long moment. The woman your father threw away is not the only woman here, he said slowly. The one you see in your own mind. She is not the only one either. I see the one who is waiting to be found. His words echoed in her mind. The fierce heat of summer mellowed into the golden light of autumn. Arabella's hands, once soft, became capable and calloused. Her body, once a source of shame, became an instrument of purpose, strong and resilient. The small water skin was replaced by a pot, and that pot by a larger one. The women of the tribe no longer treated her as a fragile curiosity. She was now part of the rhythm of their circle, their sidelong glances having turned into nods of inclusion. That one evening, as a sliver of moon hung in the indigo sky, he came to her. Come. She followed him, away from the village fires, up a narrow path that snaked up the cliff face. They climbed in a comfortable silence until they reached a wide ledge that overlooked the valley. Below, the village fires twinkled like a constellation of earthbound stars. From a pouch he drew a small carved wooden flute. The music that flowed from it was not a tune, but a feeling. It spoke of longing, of solitude, and of a profound peace. When the last note faded into the night, she opened her eyes to find him watching her. The melody. It's so beautiful, she whispered. His gaze held hers, steady and clear. It is, he said, his voice a low vibration. As are you. Arabella's breath caught in her throat. No one, in her entire life, had ever said that to her. Your father, Maka continued softly, saw only a list of things you could not do. He never stayed long enough to see the strength in your spirit or the compassion in your heart. We see it. I see it. There, under the immense, star-dusted canopy of the desert sky, Arabella felt the last heavy chains of her past finally begin to rust and fall away. The first frost of the season laid a delicate, silver lace upon the land, and with it came a warning. A scout returned, breathless, with news of white men approaching from the east. That night, after the council of elders met, Maka came to Arabella, his face a mask of stone. Your father, he said, his voice flat. He travels with the blue-coated soldiers. A familiar dread, a ghost from her past, crept into her heart. What does he want? I do not know, Maka admitted. He then looked directly at her, his gaze demanding an unvarnished truth. You must decide now, Arabella. If he has come to take you back, will you go? The woman she had been would have wept with relief at such a question, but that woman was a ghost. "That world has no place for me," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "My place is here. With your people, with you." A flicker of an unreadable emotion crossed Maka's eyes, relief, perhaps, or something deeper. He simply nodded. "Then, we will face this together." They arrived the next day, a dozen men in blue, an intrusion of sharp angles and cold metal into the valley's soft curves. Behind them, astride a magnificent bay, sat Lord Covington, looking thoroughly out of place and entirely in command. The Apache gathered at the village entrance, not threatening, but not retreating. Maka stood at their center, Arabella at his side. "Arabella!" her father cried, his feigned relief quickly souring to disgust as he took in her appearance. "Good heavens, girl, look at the state of you. We have come to free you from these brutes." "I am not a prisoner, father," she replied, her voice surprisingly steady. "Don't be absurd," he snapped. "You've been bewitched. Lieutenant, seize my daughter. She is clearly not in her right mind." The lieutenant, a man with cautious eyes, hesitated. "Sir, our mandate is to investigate a captive situation. If the lady is here by her own will—" "Her will?" her father scoffed. "I gave her to this savage. As punishment. By your own laws, she's my property." Maka stepped forward. "She stays or goes by her own choice," he said in careful, clear English. "Not yours, and not mine. How dare this savage dictate terms to me?" Lord Covington roared, his face crimson with rage. It was the moment his pride pushed things past the point of no return. As the lieutenant began to signal a reluctant withdrawal, Lord Covington made a final desperate move. "If I cannot have my daughter," he snarled, pulling a small silver-plated pistol from his coat, "then no savage will." Everything seemed to slow and sharpen. The glint of the sun on the pistol's barrel, Maka's body moving to shield her. A cry not of pain from Maka, but from a young warrior who had thrown himself in front of his chief. The world exploded in a single, deafening crack. Chaos erupted. The Apache warriors surged forward, surrounding the startled soldiers, but through the tumult, Maka's voice cut like a blade. "Hold!" The command was absolute. And in the ringing silence that followed, the standoff had ended, and a crime had been committed. In the tense aftermath, the lieutenant was decisive. "This man is under my authority now," he said curtly to Lord Covington. "He will be tried for attempted murder." He turned to Arabella one last time. "Miss Covington, are you absolutely certain of your choice?" "I have never been more certain of anything in my life," she replied. And the words were a vow. She did not watch them lead her father away, now a shrunken, defeated figure, his pride as shattered as her clay pot had been. Her attention was already on the wounded warrior. Without hesitation, Arabella was at his side. She called for clean water and the specific herbs she now knew by sight and feel. Her hands, once symbols of her uselessness, now moved with a purpose she had never known, cleaning the wound and applying a poultice of crushed leaves she knew would stop the bleeding and fight infection. Later, while the village celebrated the warrior's bravery with drumming and song, Arabella sat alone by a quiet fire, separate from the main circle. The events of the day churned within her. A storm of horror and release. Maka found her there, settling beside her in their familiar silence. "He would have killed you," she whispered, the full horror of the realization dawning on her. "My own father." "There are men who can see the world only as things to be owned," Maka said softly, his voice free of judgment. "To your father, you were not a daughter to be loved, but a problem to be solved. A possession he could not bear to see in another's hands." "And I believed him," she confessed, the words tasting of old poison. "I believed I was worthless because I wasn't delicate enough or obedient enough." Maka reached out and gently turned her face toward his. The firelight was warm and steady in his eyes. To me, he said, his voice a steady anchor in the darkness, you are exactly as you should be. Your body is strong, it is built for life, not for display. Your heart holds a kindness that this hard land needs. Your mind learns and sees the truth. What more could a man ask for? He wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. And in that quiet, profound moment, under the watch of the ancient stars, the last brittle links of the chain that had bound Arabella Covington to her father's world shattered and dissolved into the night. The seasons turned, washing the valley first in the tender green of spring, then the deep gold of summer, and finally the quiet white of. A year after her arrival, the woman who had been Arabella was no more. She had been reborn in the desert sun and wind. The tribe now called her Nalani, a name given to her by Naili, meaning the vast sky, for she said Nalani's eyes reflected its endlessness. She had found her place as a healer, her knowledge a blend of the tribe's ancient wisdom and the remedies she remembered from a grandmother's long-forgotten journals. She and Maka were joined, a union blessed not by a priest in a cold church, but by the elders under the winter solstice sky. One day, an echo from her former world arrived, a small party that included a determined young newspaper woman from Boston. Miss Worthington, the woman began, the story of the English lady who chose to stay with the Apache has become quite the sensation. My name is Nalani now, she corrected gently, her hand finding Maka's. And the story the papers tell is one of punishment, but that is not the truth. The true story is one of salvation, and so the years flowed by like a river. The legend of the Noblewoman and the Apache chief grew. When Naili passed peacefully in her sleep, Nalani stepped into her role as the keeper of healing wisdom for the tribe. Together, she and Maka became a bridge between two worlds that were learning a difficult dance of coexistence. On the 20th anniversary of the day she had left the fort, they sat together on their ledge, their sanctuary overlooking the valley. Nalani, Maka asked softly, his English now fluent from 2 decades of quiet conversations, do you ever look back with regret? She smiled, her eyes tracing the familiar lines of his face. Never, not for a single breath, she said. My father thought he was giving me a life sentence. Instead, he gave me my life. She paused, then asked the question whose answer she knew but loved to hear. What did you see that day, Maka? He looked out over the valley, remembering. The others saw a burden from a world of excess, he answered. They saw softness. And what did you see? He turned back to her, his eyes holding 20 years of love and understanding. I saw a spirit hiding in sad eyes. I saw a strength that had never been asked to show itself. I did not see the woman her father abandoned. I saw you. As the first stars of evening began to appear, Nalani rested her head on his shoulder, a deep sense of peace settling over her. Her father, in his blind arrogance, had cast her out, intending to condemn her to a harsh and desolate wilderness. He never understood, and never could, that for some souls, the wilderness is not a place of exile, that it is the only place one can truly come home.